Good morning. It's actually quite early still. Well, 10 o'clock, not that early. Today I will speak about a problem that Henry mentioned a couple of times, and actually there is a lot of people pondering about this. And this is the question about where something goes from planning, projecting, thinking into ruminating and regurgitating and overthinking. And I think actually I found the solution, because this is a massive problem, and there's a lot of advice on the net and in books. We know about this. Let me give you some examples here. Have you experienced this? You are at the grocery store when you come across a long-time friend. You smile at her. You think she's seen you, but she doesn't even pause to say hi. You try to shrug it off, thinking she might be in a rush to get her shopping done. As soon as you get to your car, your mind starts going into overdrive. Did she see me? Maybe she did not see me. But if she did, why didn't she greet me? Is she mad because I commented on her weird-looking blouse during last week's PTA meeting? But she said she didn't like that blouse. She said she only wore it because it was a gift. Why would she get mad at me for that? And so on and so on. This is called ruminating. It could also be seen as regurgitating, like a cow. And this is part of overthinking. And we know today this is advancing steadily. In a big investigation made at University of Michigan, 73% of young to middle-aged adults overthink. So it's a massive problem. But when you think about it, what is the solution? Not to think at all. And this was actually the question posed by Henry, and I also been thinking about that. Because we need to think about things that happens to us, things that could be called retention in the word of Husserl and Henri Bergson. We also need to do projection, thinking. So how do we solve this? It is a problem. And my guess is those books that recommend different solutions, I am quite certain they only work for a few people. They do work, but I think the percentage is rather low. I have some indications more research has been done, and of course this is a lot of the research, the biggest collection of research ever made. That is also a book. That is not a library research dictionary, but it's actually a book as well. I found a lot of stuff there, but it seems those books that recommend different solutions, they don't work usually. They work to some people, which is also interesting. I think we found the solution the other day here when we pressed it, Sunday, I remember. I think it is this deciding before the fact that causes it. Even though ruminating and regurgitating seem to be something that is done afterwards, in a way it's things that we decided a priori, before the fact, preemptive decidedness, that there is a now and here, and we sort of in our head can find the truth out. So remember the example, the one we meet upon in the shop. What the person is doing while ruminating is to find out the truth, the now and the here, to be certain. It's almost like a crime novel of the type of Edgar Allan Poe or Agatha Christie, where you have a detective, usually named Poirot, who investigates things. Even back to Sherlock Holmes. investigate things to find out the truth. And we seem to be doing the same thing. And what is discovered in the Derridian deconstruction is this is actually more a thing of deciding before the fact. We already decided, we already made the ontic move, and after the fact we start looking for the original, not the copy. We start looking for the truth, not the falsehood. We start looking for the real, not the imagery. And I would say, oddly enough, even if we do it afterwards, the decision has already struck. And that's part of the problem. Also helpful is this with the ear, the eyes, the senses, our projection or attention. Susie Frobel indicated that is actually things. We are not waiting for a result to do these things. We're not passively waiting for auditory signals, visual cues, or sensory proofs that this is the world, or as Bishop Berkeley said, he actually did this. This is witnessed. He kicked the stone and said, by kicking on the stone I prove reality exists. I am not too sure about that. I think we do not need to prove that the world exists. I don't think we need epistemology. I think it's an unnecessary thing. And it's coming from this metaphysics of presence. What we should do instead is actively think. Do not see this person you meet in a shop as a passive participator in the world. And don't see you as a passive friend, because you actively give out things. You decide beforehand. This is what you should do. You should use your conjuring, just as we do with our senses. And we can never ever get away with that. There is no passive hearing. There is no passive seeing. It is just ruminating, regurgitating, overthinking. And we can do it with the senses as well. I've done it myself. Sometimes, is that really true? Or is that person I thought it was? The second look will never ever help me, I noticed. It doesn't add. It's like I think my vision is something obscured or to the thing. It's a lack of training of actually actively, intentionally projecting something outwards. And the level of projecting also means what you receive will have a higher quality. And that higher quality is not in the logocentric take. It's not better according to something out there. It is more just better. It's more fractal. Reality is in its essence complications. And there is always a level. So you see, ruminating and overthinking cannot be stopped. Otherwise, then you start to understand that you need to project instead. It's sort of being out of sync. It's like my old cat. When we took him to the vet, the cat was very docile. It had a very weak, angry level, so to speak, too weak. And when he was given a shot, I remember this, by the vet, he tried to bite the vet 15-20 seconds after the shot. And of course that was way too late. And I remember the vet was laughing. It was a bit too late to get angry now. My hands are out of the way. You can't bite me. And that is reacting after the fact. I would say ruminating, regurgitating and overthinking is after the fact. Another point here, do you see animals regurgitating, ruminating, overthinking? Well, obviously you see cows regurgitating, but I mean in the thinking process. Going over things over and over again. Well, you see it sometimes, but extremely seldom in wild nature. Extremely seldom. They just go for it. And I would say this resistance to enter into situation is caused by this passiveness. And that indecision, that lack of volition, that lack of active direction, that is what's causing the failure. It doesn't matter how this woman in the example, it could be that she is really angry with you. But if you actively project, you can actually thwart that anger and you can apologize or you can come to a solution. But if you're passive, you can't do anything. There is no energy coming from you that can be met with an energy coming from the other person. So waiting for the fact after it happened, it's already introducing a very low level of energy. And you sort of, you prime your whole system. I think that's a good word actually. You prime your system is pushing on the pants. What's the matter with the students? You prime the system, you tell the system to be passive and not have any energy. And that means every situation, perceptual, encounter-like, thinking like, planning like, deciding like, everything will have this out of sync thing that you try to sort of decide things after the fact. It's a matter, as Derrida said, always with bad timing. You look for the present because you somehow lost it, but you're looking for the present maybe in the wrong way. You should project towards it. Then you will receive present. Not looking for an original, because you will know what is original once you project. And if you don't project, you can never ever tell an original from a falsehood. You cannot tell truth from untruth. And you cannot tell reality from the imagined, because 3 times as much comes out of our sensory organs than comes back. So if you don't send anything out, the sending out function is 3 times as much. So you can imagine it's mainly due to you not sending anything out, you don't get anything back. You can't have truth. If you prime your system to passivity, you don't know anything about reality. You have no access to it. Very little anyway. Maybe you have enough access to keep you going, and I would say this has led to a weakening of our whole system, the priming towards passivity. So we sort of have become more dull, all thumbs, not skilled. And to that we can add from Ian McGilchrist, the little I had time to look at, we are not really satisfied anymore. Satisfaction doesn't come. We don't really believe in the stuff that we strive for, which of course will affect our happiness level, but it will also affect the result. So the priming of the system to passivity gets its effect and they sort of confirm that reality is out of your control. Because sending out 3 times as much means that you control the environment 3 times as much as it controls you. And I would say most of the book, if you go around in the library, the authors have this idea of the reality being passive. It's been the prevailing idea in Western tradition until recently, more or less. So that is pervading. So the priming of the system is not something we do originally. You already have it when you're born. It is in your environment. And you see it to be a part of reality. This is not a part that you thought up or got indoctrinated in. It is part of reality, your perceived reality. And I was saying yesterday, for my own part, I think I got that before I started to speak even. And I think that's a guess. I will check out more with Ian McGilchrist. When do we get this idea of the world out there or a world at large? I think that could be established very early on. And it's definitely a part of reality, not of our thinking, ideology, philosophy, or anything like that. And neither, in some ways, there is not a thing we can question. We can question it, but we also need to train it. As you see, if you don't train your senses, they will be dull, and they will confirm the classical model, so to speak. And you will feel dissatisfaction, and naturally, which is not a fault, you would look for this obelisk of now and here. You can see this as a solace, a teddy bear, something you hug, because if you don't project, you don't get any reality, and you need a substitute. And this is okay. It's not a bad thing. Derrida said that metaphysics is a bad thing. The article I read yesterday actually reminded me about that, because Spolimi, or whatever his name was, from the University of Naples, is a criticism of metaphysics of presence. Derrida never used those words. He doesn't do criticism. He tries to reveal tendencies that are inherent, and I would say they are just. This is not the point we should attack. This is the symptom. What we should do is not to attack, it's to give some energy and see that we are at a very low level of energy, and because of our weakness we strive even harder to that. And at some point, yes, we have to let go of this, but not too early. There is some indications that we are actually in extremely weakened state. And I think maybe I had a discussion yesterday with a doctor who was working on one of the biggest ward centrals, which is like, what's that called in English? Somewhere in between a house doctor and the hospital, like a big place where you meet a lot of doctors. And he said that allergies, asthma, autoimmune diseases like arthrosis are growing even more now, the last 10 years than earlier. And they show a weakness in the bodily system. We are not resilient anymore. It's obvious. And that goes for the psyche, that also goes for the body. Because if we don't project, we're going to be less fractal, and we know all systems that are weak are not so complex, like the heartbeat that is out of its bounds and not having this quality of, he had a good word, beauty, because it looks beautiful when you look at it in the electrocardiogram. I managed not to say electroencephalogram, but this is an electrocardiogram. Cardio means heart in Greek, I think, and that shows the beat of the heart. And a healthy heartbeat is very jagged, and does never repeat itself. It's like the decimals of pi, and that's a healthy signal. Pause. So let's continue. I try to depict the whole thing a bit more like this, that at each level everything is included, like the world and our inner self, endogenous, exogenous. So the world and what's inside changes for each level. This could be seen as chaotic systems. But always remember, the world changes with the level. If you go higher up, it's not the same world. And what we can have on the lower level is more or less an idea of everything being regulated outside by itself, determinism maybe. I also call it consistency and coherence with small c's. And that's sort of implying they make itself, themselves, as in the theorem, the hopeful idea of Gödel to make a theorem that showed that mathematics was coherent and consistent, which didn't work. And when he found out it was impossible, he broke. But that also showed he was dependent. He was here on a lower chaotic system. So his world needed that. It was a necessity. This is what Rodolphe Gachet is pointing to. There is no absolutes. The very idea of absolutes is actually coming from this. This is the idea of ones and zeros. It's either or. And it's very convenient if you are on a lower level because it simplifies things. But it does not really work that well. It's not a working principle. It's more that you subjectively, emotionally decide that something is in a certain way. But once you start doing your predicting, your projection, you will see that the result is not very satisfying. I think here also a little bit about the writings of Ben Ariely, which I can recommend, where he shows that we are not rational, and I think that's a very good point for him. And he shows it's with research, his own experience, and he also indicates how you can get more planning by disregarding these ideas of everything being out there already and ready-made, and sort of you can plan your existence in the idea of building Lego bits. That's what he calls it. We also have here now an existence that become necessary at the low level of complexity we have to have now. It's not something that we can give up. It's our comfort, and it also helps us some way to survive mentally, emotionally, but not in reality. It doesn't make us strong. And I would say this is also a level of intellect, what is lower here. So both what you think about the world and what the world is on a lower scale of complexity. And this is very important. This is, I think, is our take that is very different from ordinary books. Because in ordinary books you just talk about yourself. You should change yourself. And I think that don't work, because you have to look how the world changes. And as long as you don't change the world, you're not going to change either. That's how it is. And learning from chaotic systems and how fractality works, we know that the world changes when you change, always, without exception. And as you go higher, you also enter more in both the endogenous and the exogenous. On the lower level, when you have now existence, consistency and coherency, you don't share much about reality with other people. This is the point coming from Jacques Derrida in Limited Incorporated. He actually reaches out to John Searle, trying to help him. And the limitations he makes are mostly for himself, because you cannot limit other people more than they are already limited. If you read John Searle, you are already limited. Otherwise, you wouldn't find anything interesting in what he writes. That's how it is. Because he is still stuck in this world. And I think John Searle, for me, is an excellent example. He seemed to be a very charming person, but he really, really tries to get rid of these things. Because he knows, I think he got that from quantum mechanics. He knows that inherently there is something wrong with all this idea, but he cannot let it go. And especially in an interview made only 15 years ago, and he was hardly pressed. He said, I'm giving up representationalism. I don't think there is a world out there. But then he was pressed even harder, and he said, well, there is something that is objective within everyone. And there it turned up again. So you cannot, without having a development, you cannot change. You cannot change by argument, and you can't even convince yourself. You need to change. And it's so obvious in John Searle. And I think that was also the case, that John Searle was the only purist analytical philosopher that Derrida approached. He also mentioned Austin, but Austin is more of a philosopher of language. It's more flexible, so to speak. All the other analytical philosophers would, for Derrida, would be too an easy target. He would never approach Putnam, for instance. He kills off himself, Derrida. Was thinking, I think in my head. Excuse me, Derrida, for putting your thoughts into my head for what it is. We also, when we get higher up, as more as we can project things, we will receive more. And then we will also be located in the world. We will actually be in space. And that will gain us calmness, direction, and planning ability. So the fault in these books is they don't change the outside world, and they don't see that at a certain level you need these things. It's not something you can give up. It's like saying to a little baby, you should start eating potatoes and meat. The baby can't do it. It has to have his mother's milk. Otherwise, why would people strive for these things? And I think this is what deconstruction shows. This is an actual striving. And Derrida also points to, as Gachet so eloquently wrote about, that he feels it himself sometimes. And that's why he could write about it. If he was very high up, he couldn't even have written about it. Why would he? Would have been doing something else. But it shows everything is a matter of level. And whereas at the lower level, everything is either true or false, everything is either good or bad, and so forth, the more you come, the more you have this, as I call, complexity scale, which I think fractality shows very good. You zoom in, and here you find more complexities. And for every time you zoom in, you get more complexities and you get more of the world. Whereas here, you can't take complexities. It has to be simple. And this I often show with either or. There's very low-graded fractality here. But that's because your consciousness is lowly fractal. This is because you are not used to project. You're not used to do retention. You cannot be complex here. Therefore, you do simple polarities. And you can observe it in yourself when you're very tired or when you're stressed. If you're rushing for the flight, I've been doing that myself. I've been late a couple of times. And in that rush, everybody is either good or bad. The good ones are not standing in my way, and the bad ones are standing in my way, and I need to get to the gate. I think that happened 2 times. Stress yourself up and feel the difference in mentality. The more unbalance you get, the more polarities you get. You can see the nicer complexities. And imagine yourself going to an art gallery with exquisite art, trying to enjoy it, but you know you only have 10 minutes. And it's not so much that it's just 10 minutes. You will feel stressed, and you will not be able to enjoy the art. As well, you won't enjoy a fine dinner or a beautiful view when you're in a rush. You need to get to your goal. And therefore, in some way, there is a flux between the lower level and the higher level, constantly going on. And by recognizing that flux, we can understand why the higher level is better. I think we all glide between the levels, but we don't remember when we were at the higher level, so we don't appreciate it. It's learning to enjoy life, so to speak, and see when it's enjoyable. I was talking about my old teacher earlier in painting, and he has this idea about frugality, and that is just eat a little bit of everything. And he likes to enjoy like large courses with 7 plates, something like that. He visits Michelin restaurants all over the world, but he eats very little, because he says if you overdo it, you take away the satisfaction, because you don't have this the equal level between hunger and appetite. It needs to be a sort of balance. So he actually tries to get maximum enjoyment out of the dinner. And this is also what it's about. It's not getting into the polarities too much, the extremes. Because this actually says there's an absolute truth, and we stick to that absolute truth. There's a lot of problems. We will end in conflict with other people, with ourselves. It will be too sharp. And it will also, because the world is fractal, it will lead us astray, because the world is not that simple. It's a very interesting thing coming from fractality, and I think this hugely adds to all sorts of subjects, no matter what they are. But it's interesting, this could actually help the self-help books, because they only work for a certain percentage of people, which is good in itself. But I think those are people who are having some sort of stability, resilience to themselves, and somewhere they understood that adversities and bad things, that we usually term bad things, can actually be quite beneficial. Although we label them bad and horrible and we want to avoid them, but by avoiding them, we slide into a lower level of complexity, because what we label as bad is actually something good, because all complexities are good. They always sustain the system. And especially in these days where faith is so small, it builds permanence. Whereas sticking to the lower level doesn't build permanence. Sameness doesn't build permanence. You get a system that is not permanent over time. This is building a soul, having a soul, something that lasts over time. It doesn't disappear when you're stressed. I would say it doesn't disappear when you fall asleep in the end, as suggested by some yogis. You can keep your consciousness even in unconsciousness and even beyond death. That's what I think. Because this is actually the very makeup of reality. Complexities is what there is. But that might be a chapter for another discourse, but still, see complexities as something that always aids you. It's always good. But at the same time, do not forget the message from my old teacher, the venerable Master Søren, always saying, quantum satis, which is a very good saying, all in equal portions. You don't want to break this. And that advice is not, I looked into 10 different books about how to become stronger and how to build your intellect and directionless. They're all good, but they don't have this quantum satis. You don't want to break this. You don't want to go too hastily. And especially in the beginning, you need to be very careful. Don't expose you to too much at one time. And as I said yesterday, do take rest afterwards. See the rest or the reward as a gratification for what you've done, and then completely relax. Enjoy not doing anything. And that is in itself something to devour. I can admit voluntarily, for me it's very hard. It's one of the hardest things to do. I wanted to be constantly occupied, but there is a joy in that as well. And once you feel that, it's halfway to heaven. It's like you just relax, you let your mind sort of go wherever it wants, and you feel satisfied. And I think our thinking system needs its rest. At sometimes it needs to sort of let its overflow calm down, and we reach this level of tranquility. And I think this was mentioned earlier, many lectures when we were at the church in Skärv, I think, and I spoke about Dr. Joe Dispenza. He was talking about brain levels from the electroencephalogram. And these brain levels are more complex higher up. You get to the delta level, and there you also find calmness. And we know if you go to those levels of thinking, you get a more acuteness, a sharpness. People that are tested, they are learned how to get into this state, are perceived also by others as being sharper, more precise, more to the point. They also get the impression of being knowing what they're talking about, or being confident about their things without being overconfident, which is more of this thing, being too argumentative or putting too many arguments on top of each other. There is also a very interesting thing here I just want to mention briefly, and this is this. Even though it's complex, it can be quite short. And I was thinking about some poetry I've been reading, the Japanese haiku. It's incredibly short, but it's so concise. So in the shortness, there is a lot of complexity hidden. That's very interesting. That's partly due to that you change your mind and you become more complex, but it can be so simple as well. So it builds for simplicity, and this is what Henri Bergson, if you're good at projection, the projection can be incredibly simple. You can just project, I want to do this, I plan this, and within that planning there is an enormous complexity underneath. Although the very formulation in your body is a little bit like the Alexandrian idiom of let your neck be free so your head can go up and forward and your back can widen and broaden, lengthen, sorry. It can be very simple, and it can hide this complexity. It could be underneath. Maybe some of the works that Picasso did, that was just very, very short scribble, but somehow that expressed everything. So do not think of complexity as necessarily being complex in the way of this system, the old system. This is more of having too many things in your head and you can't get them into one straight line. They are sort of showing the path left, right, up, down, whereas this more suggests the higher you get, the more of a unison direction you get. And all of a sudden you get simplicity in thinking instead of this, suggested from the article from New York Times, this extensive complexity of overthinking about what another person is thinking, which doesn't aid and makes also for the energy to dissipate in all directions. Because listen now, what he explained was that it was almost like one thought went in one direction, like a positive, and the other one went into the negative. And they sort of nullify each other. He is almost, as he routing, maybe she is angry with me, or maybe I am angry with her. You can hear polarities are very, very nullifying. And this nullifying principle takes away energy. It doesn't give a direction. And rushing for the now I remember rushing for the train once. It's like when you get too stressed, you choose that direction and you only run in the left direction, and then all of a sudden you start running in the right direction. Then you have to sort of adjust, and in the end you don't go anywhere. You need to have one clear direction. And sometimes I'm actually thinking of that Cartesian system. In this system it's very hard to have a direction. It doesn't allow for a direction. This in itself is a sort of a fragmented space view. So even though it looks so clear, here you have a trajectory, there's the ball at this time point, this is the ball, this is the ball, a very clear trajectory. In reality, where we always already have been, it doesn't give a short trajectory in our bodies, in our system, in our thinking, because we are already in the world. We're not outside of the world. And that's another philosophical point I want to add today, but I think this can greatly help those books, and that message can be sort of harvested to an even greater degree. Yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.